Small group.
You having Christian study?
Oh, I am bringing it down. I'll go Christian next week. I'll try to get them done Sunday. Okay. Well, we're wrapping up our conversation on the Middle East tonight. And I'm going to try to go through my part quickly so we can talk. And you can ask questions or make comments. But tonight, I want us to end with an understanding of what is current American policy. And maybe what does the church have to say about this conversation. In 2002, Israel was in the midst of the second intifada. Intifada is an Arabic word that means uprising. This is according to Middle Eastern terms, the way they define it, this was their second time that there was a grassroots, semi-organized revolt, if we want to use that word, against the Israeli government and what was perceived as oppression of the Palestinians. And the Palestinians really had no army. This was not a army response. This was a guerrilla response. This was the suicide bombers. And all of us here remember when we were reading the news, and that's probably where in our heads the words Palestinian and suicide bomber went together. Terrorist. Because I can't tell you how many people have said to me, well, Palestinians are terrorists, right? It really came out of the first and second intifada. In 2002, George W. Bush proposed a new solution to this problem. And he called it the Roadmap for Peace. It was primarily an American initiative, but it had the support of the United Nations, the European Union, and Russia. Of course, in 2002, we were all still reeling from 9/11, right? And we felt like the whole Middle East was on fire. I guess in many ways it was, certainly Iraq and Afghanistan. And this was part of a larger plan to try to bring peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And remember that in 1948, the United Nations had called for two countries to live side by side. That was the plan. Basically, the roadmap for peace is going back to that 1948 armistice line and calling for a two-state solution. I think if you learn any words tonight, you learn the meanings of the words, you learn the meaning of the words two-state solution. The goal was to have an independent Palestinian state with its own elected officials, its own authority, its own statehood. In other words, Palestine being a country. And this was the deal. Everybody's going to end the violence on both sides. The settlement activity, we talked a lot about settlements last week, and that is critical to understanding this. Remember, the settlements are the illegal construction of housing, really nice housing, on land that was Palestinian land. And so the Israelis were going to stop the settlements. Palestinian institutions were going to step up and be functional government institutions. Pave the roads, open the schools, do what government is supposed to do. The Palestinians were going to recognize Israel's right to exist. That's a big deal. Because so many of the Arab countries have yet to say that Israel has a right to any of the real estate. And so the recognition of Israel's right to exist is the big piece of it. Egypt has said Israel has a right to exist. Jordan has said Israel has a right to exist. The Palestinian Authority has not yet formally, even though they have said it kind of off the record, not formally said that Israel has a right to exist. That Israel would accept that Palestine is a sovereign state with its own authority, and it would all be done by 2005. Ariel Sharon was the prime minister, and by the way, last week I said Moshe Dayan walked up on the Temple Mount. That would have been a miracle because he'd been dead 20 years. Greg pointed that out to me. But it was Ariel Sharon, who was a military leader, but now was prime minister. He was rejected that because he says we have to have these settlements. Remember that Israel has an open door policy. Any Jew from any country in the world may immigrate to Israel without question. You just have to be a Jew, but any color, race, nationality, ethnicity. And he said, where are we going to put all these people unless we build these settlements? And this horrible quote to Colin Powell, what do you want, for a pregnant woman to have an abortion because she is a settler? We've got these settlers who are having babies. Who immigrates? Young people, right? Young people immigrate. Old people generally don't immigrate. When our ancestors came, they were young. My grandparents came from Scotland when they were 15 and 14 years old. Now, they married here in the States, but they came from the same little village in Scotland. So young people is who immigrates. And of course, young people are going to get married and have babies, and they want new homes, and these settlements are built for them. The Palestinian Authority, which it was the successor to the PLO, accepted the roadmap. The Israelis said, with conditions. Here are the conditions. You got to stop the violence. You got to destroy illegal weapons. Israel is not obligated to stop the violence until the Palestinians stop the violence. You go first. The United States would monitor it. Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state, not as just a regular state, but as a Jewish state. And that's important because the Constitution is a constitution favorable toward Jews. They would not discuss the settlements except illegal outposts. Now, settlements start as illegal outposts. Some group goes out and pitches a Winnebago or two or three, and that becomes an outpost. But at some point, the Israeli government recognizes that outpost and makes it a settlement and pays for it. And that Israel would control the Palestinian media, newspapers, radio, television, internet. And so the solution was that Yasser Arafat was neutralized and moved to the background. And came to the front was a man who is a reasonable man that Israel felt like they could work with and the Americans liked, a man named Mahmoud Abbas. However, the killing didn't stop. In the first 2 weeks of May, 43 Palestinian civilians and 10 Israeli civilians were killed. In 2003, the United Nations endorsed the roadmap. But by the end of 2004, the Palestinian suicide attacks had not stopped, and Israel had not stopped new construction. And remember, they start building the wall in 2000. But somewhere along in here, the Palestinians realized that these suicide bombings are losing the public relations campaign with the world. They thought, and I think this is what my Palestinian friends say, and the Palestinian Christians say, we really thought if we brought attention to the area that people would see how we are being oppressed. It didn't work. And they came in the early 2000s, they came to realize that didn't work. All it did was make the word Palestinian synonymous with terrorists. By the end of the Second Intifada, 110 Israelis and 820 Palestinians had been killed. Now, those are not numbers Americans hear very often. We hear all of the Israelis being killed, but the Palestinians being killed don't often get reported. So, George W. Bush in 2005, and I put this quote in here, and the italics are mine, because this is where the concept of the two-state solution came from, which is, to this day, technically American policy. Any final status between the two parties and changes to the 1949 armistice lines have to be mutually agreed upon. A viable two-state solution must ensure two things: contiguity of the West Bank. In other words, the wall and the roadblocks that the Israelis had built have now separated town from town, Palestinian town from town. How can you have a country, an autonomous country, when you can't even travel from one town to another in the same country? You can't do that. And remember on the map, Gaza is over here, right? Gaza is completely separate. How can you have a country called Palestine if the West Bank is here and Gaza is here, and you can't get between the two? Nobody, no one in the world expects to drive through another country to get to the other part of their own country, right? Make sense? We don't do that in states. Now, I have to drive through the tip of Georgia and Alabama to go from Tennessee down to Georgia, right? You know, when you go down that highway. But that's a state, and there's ways around that. But so George Bush says, if this is going to work, we have to be able to give the Palestinians a contiguous country. Does it make sense? And he says, this is the position of the United States. And that's what it is to this day. Which is why, in just a minute, we'll talk about when the President Trump wants to put a capital or an embassy in Jerusalem, what that calls into question. Now, the other solution besides a two-state solution is what? A one-state solution. And just think of that as winner takes all. The one-state solution says all of this is Israel. The West Bank and Gaza, the Golan, all of these areas that are being disputed are really all Israel. And I told you last week, I have a map on my wall, a really cool map, a topographic map of Israel, and it shows you the boundaries of Israel. And guess what? It is from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, from Dan to Beersheba. There is no division. Can you see how those are competing visions? Does that make sense? Palestinians today say we should have accepted the 1949 line and let it rest. But they didn't. Like any of us, we would probably fight back for what we think is ours. But they didn't. So your vision of the future depends on whether you see a two-state solution or a one-state solution. Now, there is general consensus by the level-headed folks what the boundaries ought to be, except for a way to connect Gaza. I have not heard anybody say that they've got a way to connect Gaza. But here's the problem. Everybody wants Jerusalem. Both sides say the only way we will accept a two-state solution is if we get Jerusalem. Now there is a division, East and West Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is managed by the Jordanian government. They have control. Actually, what the Jews call Temple Mount and what the Muslims called the Dome of the Rock, Al-Aqsa Mosque, all of that complex of buildings up there, that is technically in Palestinian side and under Jordanian control. Jordanians have authority over the Temple Mount. But at the bottom of that wall is Israel. So when there's a dust up, all the Jordanian Muslim or Palestinian Muslims have to do is start throwing rocks over that wall, and the Jews down below are praying, hey, we're praying here, and it gets ugly, right? And for many of the ultra-devout Jews, it just nearly kills them. That the closest they can get to Temple Mount is at the foot of the wall. Does that make sense? And hopefully that will help you understand why this is so heated. Now, when President Trump says, we're going to put our embassy, we're going to move our embassy from Tel Aviv. Now, all of Tel Aviv is like New York City. It is Israeli. No, the Palestinians don't claim any access to it. Tel Aviv is the business city of Israel. It is the shopping malls, the corporate headquarters, everything, banks, all of that is based in Tel Aviv, except the Israeli seat of government, the Knesset, their parliament, of course, is in West Jerusalem. So when President Trump says, we're going to move our embassy from Tel Aviv, where all the other embassies of the world have their embassy, to Jerusalem, the Palestinians say, what part of Jerusalem? And are you saying that American policy is now a one-state solution? And when the president has been asked, are you in favor of a one-state solution, he defers. Well, we're not going to answer that question right now. Now, do you see why that's critical? Is American policy changing so that the American solution is the complete eradication of any Palestinian governmental authority? Are you still with me? Now, I gave you a paper, Jack Sarah is the evangelical Christian Arab president of the Bethlehem Bible College. We would be very comfortable sending any of our children to study at the Bethlehem Bible College. It is Protestant evangelical. When I was there, it felt a whole lot like being at the BSU, really. They don't call them Baptists. They really don't have Palestinian Baptists. But they would be very much like us. Believe in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ is possible by confession of faith, that immersion baptism is the mode of baptism called for in the New Testament, but they are Palestinian. And he has written a very nice response to the question, Mr. Trump, don't do it.
Please.
Please don't do it. And one of his arguments in this little article, and you'll be able to read it tonight, one of his arguments is, we are witnessing for Jesus, and too many believe that being Christian means being American. And he reminds us in here that Arabs were Christians on the day of Pentecost. What is that? About 1730 years, 40 years before America was even conceived. Right? So his argument is, we are trying to maintain a Christian witness in the Arab world, and you're destroying it. Now, the word is, just the latest thing that I read this past week, is that the Secretary of State of the United States has said the embassy will move by May. I'm glad that I'm out of there by March 24th. I'm on my 23rd, I'm on the way home. But now, there is no formal Palestinian response because they have no weapons. There's no Palestinian army. What they have is, they do have security details, but basically it's rock throwing and name calling and marches. Even labor marches, because Palestinians still work in Jewish homes.
Do they have a building they're going to?
I don't know. They must have something in mind if they're moving in May. And where that is, I don't know. I'll be interested to see if we can see that building while we're there. I don't know. It'd be interesting to find out, because our guide will know if there is a specific building or not. Now, I'm not happy that the embassy is being moved to Jerusalem, because if a two-state solution is our American policy, then what the president should have said is, we're going to build two embassies. We're going to build an embassy in West Jerusalem and an embassy in East Jerusalem. Do you see what a slap it is in the face? For the Palestinians, who the Americans have said, formal American policy, you deserve a state. And now for the American State Department and the White House to say, you don't deserve a state, we're not even going to give you a key to the building. Are you with me?
It's ignorant.
I have a friend that's Jewish, and he said it's the worst thing that Trump's ever done, because it's just going to cause more dissension, more problems. than it
So
solves.
is it a change of policy, or is it not? And we don't know.
Sounds like it.
The president won't say.
I don't think they even thought it through. My opinion.
That's right.
Just off the top of his head.
And so now he's determined, well, I won't get too deep into it, my personal feelings, except to say, I think it was too quick.
And this also, this friend said it's going to cost a fortune to build an embassy in Jerusalem.
And I don't know where they're going in May, because there's no way they could
This is why I'm asking
put
about
something into security. But I read Rex Tillerson say today it's going to happen in May.
This is why I was asking about the building, simply because you don't put an embassy in an unsecured location, because an embassy represents sovereign U.S. territory. So the question that I have raised right now is he doing this with the expectation of, this thing gets out of hand, we're gonna jerk him right back to Tel Aviv, which I could see him doing, knee-jerk reaction. Because, you know, we've got the embassy in Tel Aviv, it is manned, secured, you know, all the things that we need an embassy to have is there. It took, when we built the one in Moscow, granted, that was full of problems, but it took over 2.5 years to construct that. And
The new embassy that just opened in London was, what, a 10-year construction, something like that. Because American embassies are full of technology and security. And so I wasn't sure what he was saying to say we're going to move in May. It's not like you go out and rent an office building.
I could see them moving the ambassador into a facility that the Israelis may offer, but to move the entire staff, which is huge, I mean, it's probably over 100 personnel, plus the security team, which is Marines, and you have to relocate the Marines, and that's not an easy.
And barracks and life, they have to live and.
All of that, so it is not, yeah, that's why I'm wondering, okay, is he doing this, and then it's kind of like, hey, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna check the reaction, if it gets out of hand.
I don't know. What do y'all think? Who else? Somebody else?
Well, it says on here that, on the one that you gave us, that he believes that it was primarily American evangelicals who
Yes.
encouraged President Trump to do
So,
this.
so remember we talked, I guess it was last week, maybe while you were in Florida, Becky, but we talked last week that a lot of the pro-Israeli agenda is being driven by the fundamentalist Christian right, who are believing that they are getting, that by restoring the nation of Israel with a flag with the Star of David, I mean, that fits right into the storyline, that if they can just get on the Temple Mount and tear that thing down and rebuild the temple, Messiah will come.
Well, that's what I thought.
That's right. And so we do know that the ultra-conservative American evangelicals have a lot of influence in government right now. And I can't tell you that I know they're the ones whispering in his ear, but I can tell you that's what it sure seems like. And that's what Dr. Sarah, he may say, I don't know how he says it, certainly believes that that's who's pushing the agenda. Because it's not the Roman Catholics. Roman Catholics are, the Pope Francis is not pushing this agenda. It's not middle and left side of American Christianity. It's really just this evangelical right-wing side of American Christianity, and some Europeans who are British especially, are pushing this vision of the restoration of the kingdom of David and the return of the Messiah.
Well, we also have to remember too that in Judaism there's Orthodox, conservative, liberal, but then there's the other, which we don't hear a lot about, which is the Reconstructionists, who want that dome destroyed and the temple rebuilt, and they have a lot of.
So let's talk about this ultra right-wing Judaism, the Hasidim. And these are the guys in the black brimmed hats and the knee socks and the long fur coats
And the warlocks.
and the locks.
Well, they had the prayer shawls, and you see the lactase tied on their wrists, and there's a large group in Brooklyn that in fact we had an Orthodox Jewish rabbi who I got to know on active duty. He just retired, and he
And not Hasidic. He was Hasidic.
yeah, in fact, he traveled, and he lived away from his family because his family still resided in Brooklyn. And now he's the president of the Jewish Welfare Board, which makes all the decisions for American Jews. And so he's president of that now.
So in Israel, and these folks are dressing like this because they came out of Eastern Europe. Romania, Ukraine, out of Eastern Europe. They're wearing this costume that they're wearing, the knee socks and the black robes, the silk. They'll wear these silk pajama robes when they're taking off their fur coats and things. They aren't wearing that because it's Jewish costume. They're wearing it because it's a costume that they wore in 19th century Eastern Europe. But they don't work in Israel by law. They are on public support. The federal government pays them a stipend because they believe it is their responsibility to pray and study the Bible, the Old Testament, and pray for the restoration of the Davidic kingdom. Now, they don't serve in the military, they don't hold jobs, they really aren't educated outside of Judaism, and there is a groundswell against them in Israeli society because most Israelis say they need to work and hold jobs like we do. Now, they don't have that in the United States. this Hasidic community in Brooklyn works. They have jobs
Yeah.
in New York City. That's all right. And but in the Middle East, in Israel, they don't work. And so you see them, these men and boys, at the Wailing Wall every day. At the Wailing Wall, when you go down the Wailing Wall, if you turn to the left, there's an underground part that's a synagogue. And there's men and boys in there, and they're memorizing Torah, and they're praying, doing the davening, and the reading, and then they're socializing. But it's no women allowed in that. But that's what they do every day. And so there is a partnership between these ultra-Orthodox Hasidim and the right-wing American evangelicals, John Hagee and the crowd, who are premillennial, dispensational in theology. There is a weird alliance between those two. And that's who has the ear right now of the president, and who knows where that will go. We don't know. But I think the big question is, what is American policy? What are we going for? Are we going for a one-state or a two-state solution? Skip over section 4 and go to section 5. And you can read this on your own, but there is a growing groundswell of middle to liberal Israelis. And one of the organizations is called the B'Tselem. B'Tselem. Selem means peace. B'Tselem. And they have a magnificent website. And B'Tselem is documenting human rights violations by the Israeli government against Palestinians. And this is a growing voice in Israeli politics. How large they will grow, I don't know. And you can only imagine that at some point is going to come to a brick wall with the ultra-conservative Jews who are praying for the restoration of the Davidic kingdom. So I want you to hear me say that the Israeli side is not a united front. And I brought you quite a bit of documentation there. These are some very recent reports, November of last year, January of this year. And what they are doing is going in, taking pictures, documenting violations of human rights and illegal acts of the Israeli forces, IDF, Israeli Defense Forces. But I think you can read that on your own. It's fascinating. Now, when we are looking at, now go back to Roman numeral 4. When we are looking at a Christian response, I only brought you Old Testament verses, and this is by no means exhaustive. But I want to throw into your thinking that we would expect of the Israeli government what we would expect from our own government. Justice. Humane treatment. Those are the things that we expect as principles. And we always say, you always hear, America is based on Judeo-Christian principles, right? Love your enemy, love your neighbor, love God, treat your enemy fairly. And what I brought you are verses out of some of the prophets about justice toward your neighbor. Now, I want to close my part out, and then we can just talk. To say, at a personal level, I believe there needs to be a Jewish homeland. I do believe that. And I think the Jews have been the recipient of horrible abuse, really, forever. since the day they were found. There is no doubt about it. The history of the world shows that just about every time a Jew pops his head up, somebody's there trying to shoot it down. It is horrible. And I think they do deserve a homeland, a place to call their own, and I don't think it would fit anywhere else except in modern-day Israel. That being said, I do think the indigenous peoples, Palestinians, also have a right to some self-determination and the right to call themselves a state. And so I would certainly be in favor of a two-state solution. I believe it's possible. I don't think it's ever going to be easy, but I believe it's possible. I believe that there can be a peaceful solution, but it's going to take the extremist of both sides leading the picture and letting the folks of wiser heads to come together. Many years ago, when I was in Israel, I had a ring made, and I wore it today, but I took it off because I sit and work on the computer, and it gets in my way. But I wear a ring that in Hebrew says, it's a verse from the 107th Psalm, I think. I can never remember. But the verse in Hebrew is, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And that is my prayer, is that the Jerusalem would become a place where the people of every faith from around the world could come, and it would be a rich city of diverse religions. It has been that in the past, as we saw through our last 5 weeks. It has at times been a city of peace, and my prayer is that it will be again. All right, your comments. That's kind of my end of my presentation. So what's your... What do you think the answer is?
You know, it's what's striking on all this, and I've had this discussion with some rabbis, that originally God told them to go in and utterly take the land, destroy everything living, and just take it. Of course, they didn't do that. So this is where the discussion with the rabbis gets interesting, depending on what flavor. Because some have said yes, you know, and they talk about how the support, like just read recently, where a synagogue opened its doors to a mosque that had gotten burned down. They said, "You come in and worship with us." But I've talked to other rabbis who were certainly a lot more conservative, who, when you talk about these passages in Scripture, they say, "Oh, that is not for anybody but us Jews." So when it talks about injustice, it's about how we interact with each other. And then I'm quick to point out, well, when it says about the foreigner in your land, they're like, yeah, it's a sojourner. They're supposed to keep moving. So it's very interesting to hear that discussion from their perspective. But yet, again, there are others who are on the more liberal flavor who are like, yeah, you know, we kind of lost that deal when we didn't do what God told us to do originally. We kind of lost out on that. So, and by the way, it's Psalms 122:6.
122. I don't know if it was David or Greg who said a few weeks ago that a lot of Israeli politics is driven by the two words, never again.
Yeah.
Never again will we let ourselves be abused. And no doubt they were. I am not in any way discounting that. But the Palestinians say, why should we suffer for the way other people treat the Jews? You know, there's always a counter argument. Somebody else, what do you see? What is your hope for the future? Do you have any hope?
Well, my hope is that they get it all together. And what I don't see here, I know we're talking about thousands of years here, and it seems like God would intervene in this thing somehow. And I just, here again, is it the light of faith that as the children wandered in the wilderness, is that why he hasn't intervened here and made this thing right? What is it? I mean,
I'm glad you said that, Nigel, because I wanted to be sure and say that there are some grassroots movements of Palestinians and Israelis working together. I heard an article on the radio not too long ago about a support group for women with breast cancer, who were, half of the support group was Israeli and half was Palestinian. And it wasn't every day that the Palestinian women could get through security checkpoints to get to the group meeting. But that these women who had grown up thinking each other were the enemies, once they got to know each other and became supportive for each other, that there were bonds being built. In Palestine, children are taught in school, in Palestinian schools, children are taught Arabic and Hebrew. That's a good sign. Because if it says if any future generation has a hope of living together, they're going to have to speak common language. They're going to have to learn to talk to each other. I have a friend in Palestine who is probably 35 years old now and too old to be much of a professional ball player, but he's on a semi-professional basketball league team, and they're traveling as they can, and they're playing Jewish teams and Arabic teams, and so there is some grassroots movement, again, among people like us, to say, if we're going to live together, we're going to have to find a way to live together. You always got the military folks on both sides, or the ultra-religious on both sides, refusing to acknowledge that the other exists. But there is a growing middle column of folks who are saying, we got to stop killing each other, killing each other's children, because that's what's happening. Does that make sense?
yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it seems like it's just taking so long. You know?
And we talked about last week, this really started about 1920s. This is really when the heat started. So we're coming up on 100 years. But Jews and Muslims have lived in peace in that part of the world in the past. And my prayer is that they can again.
And my prayer is that non-Palestinians and non-Jewish people will be able to settle the problems without the meddling of nations that turn them into pawns on the world global stage, which is what's happened since the 19th century when England and France met to divide up the Ottoman Empire after that Europe was ending, and it's been a constant problem with Western Europeans, Americans, get our interest out of it.
And so Jack's comment is, it's not going to get any better until the other world powers get out. But of course, as long as we are dependent on oil in the Middle East, Europeans are going to feel like we have a dog in that fight. But what I'm reading is Americans are dependent on Middle Eastern oil is diminishing.
Terrible.
It's gone. We are now the largest exporter of oil.
We are.
Even listening to NPR this morning, they talk about the fact that we are exporting more oil than Saudi Arabia is exporting.
Wow. So, and maybe that'll be a good thing for Middle Eastern peace. Of course, when we entered the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, that didn't serve us well in the Arab world. Our image took a hit. Now, at times, I think George W. Bush was pretty well respected in the Middle East.
And that's one of the elements in dealing with the Arabs. The Arabs basically have a very strong eye for an eye philosophy. So, as far as they're concerned, Saddam Hussein struck you, you killed him, okay, over. But when you start going in and playing nation state and interfering with local politics, that's when they get angry. They're fine with you going in and, oh, this guy killed you, fine, you killed him, okay, that's fine, move on.
Yeah.
But this, when you start doing nation states by coming in and saying, all right, your government is no longer considered valid, we're going to basically put a populist-based government that's based on a constitution, which they generally don't believe in place, it becomes a real problem. They believe in the strength of that particular organization or tribe. They're the rulers. They determine.
I tend to think, and maybe, I mean, I may be all wrong about this, but I tend to believe that when George W. Bush proposed the roadmap for peace, he had the best of intentions. I really do. And that roadmap for peace really became policy for the Obama administration as well. Pretty much the same thing. We've got to decide if that's where we're headed next, if that is who we're going to be, and we don't know. I think we certainly in this room don't know.
Are the issues more political than they are humanitarian? Like, for instance, like the women, their attitudes towards women. I mean, this goes back to the Old Testament. And so is that one of the issues? See, I wouldn't hear.
That's all right. We'll get you the papers.
Yeah.
David?
It's very different than the attitudes toward Jewish women. Jewish women actually are very integrated into society as equals. If you look at the Jewish armed forces, women are serving right alongside men with the same ranks, and actually their relationship is exceeding that in the U.S. as far as the women's rights, if you will. A woman is just as likely to be on the front lines of any of their armed forces as a man. Now, on the Arab side, particularly the Muslim, obviously, in the very orthodox Muslim faith, no, women wear burqas and they take a back seat to everything. But indeed, it's starting to make inroads, and we're seeing inroads, at least in Saudi Arabia, where women are receiving more rights, and it's slowly coming along with it. But when we compare the two societies, the Israelite society, I mean, they're all equal now. There is no difference.
One day we were on the Sea of Galilee. We got off on the dock, and of course you went through a gift shop. It's just like going to Disney. There's a gift shop everywhere, right? And we came out of the gift shop to get on our bus, and there was a Israeli military unit practicing in formation. And the commander was this beautiful red-headed gal with this long flowing hair. It looked so funny to us. But she was beautiful. Women and men both have compulsive military, 2 years of military service in Israel. Palestine, I don't know much. You see some security presence, but not really an army presence. But on the Israeli side, women have full rights in every way. And you're as likely to see a female military commander as you are a male.
Jim, there was something floated back in the early 80s, and I remember one of my professors at college talking about it. It wasn't anything serious. I think it was more of a joke among diplomats, but it was actually floated that they really wanted to solve the Middle East problem, that they just go in and blow up the Temple Mount completely, bulldoze the thing level, and then look at it and say, now, fight over that. And with the idea that nothing's there and they would walk away. But
No, I won't walk away.
no, but it was just funny that because I think that showed the level of frustration at that point of trying to deal with all of
This
this.
does fall down onto their self-determination, and just like every family that ever lived wants to be able to determine their own course of history. In your own home, you'd like to be able to say, I'm here, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I plan to do tomorrow. And that's the same with every family that's in there, and they coalesce into units and try to form their self-determination. conveniently enough, Israel now has the authority in there to make their own determination. They have the superior force. They have the will of the world to back them up, and that's fine if they stay within their boundaries. But that's where the problem arises, is that they are not so willing. And as I say, that with the Orthodox Muslim countries around it, and it truly, we can't really attach Muslim to it either, because essentially it is not determined based on boundaries. We've arbitrarily drawn lines, largely, as we've talked about, the fact that those lines have been drawn pretty much by the British and French, who said, well, this is our piece, that's your piece, and so on. But they didn't take into account that many of the tribal organizations existing cross boundaries. And consequently, those families now have gone from year to year. So now when you look at areas such as Lebanon, Syria, whatever, there are family units that cross over boundaries. They, on the other hand, like to keep what they have and use their own self-determination. But one country says, no, this is the way you're going to behave. Others will say, no, I'm expecting to behave in this manner. We're seeing a lot of those issues now going on in Turkey, where we have the former Kurdistan area that's been chopped up into pieces, and they too now want their own self-determination, but, well, we need them to fight ISIS in Iraq. Yeah, but Turkey wants to destroy them also, but Turkey is also an ally, so we're trying to hold Turkey at bay, and they're in Syria too. So you have these three countries with one faction of people that are basically being assailed on all fronts, that we're trying to be allies with each of those units, and each one is saying, well, you know, the U.S. is fighting against us if they're here because they're supporting the Kurds. But the Kurds are just people that lived in that area for hundreds of years that say, well, we've always had this unit. We want to continue our self-determination. Problem is, it's sitting also on a really, really big oil field. So, yeah, there are obviously external factors involved. And when we look at external factors, we only need to look at our own country. We go back to, you know, if you listen to some of the past histories of race riots, for instance, and it's kind of entertaining. When the race riots broke out in the 60s and migrated across the country, the people who lived in those cities said, yeah, we had riots, but they didn't start here. There were people from another city came into our city and stirred things up until it got going. And then they moved on to the next city. And that's kind of where we have a lot of this, is that you've got the people who really want to focus on their own home, where they are, and there's external agencies, such as out of Iran, trying to stir things up, because they know they're not really there to win land for themselves. They're in there to create trouble. That way it frees them up to do what they want.
Very complicated.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I was just thinking, and probably this is a very moot point, but as a child, my grandmother bought me a kaleidoscope, and you could peep into it, and if you breathed, it would change the picture. I'd like to go back and get that picture again, but I couldn't do it. You all have talked about this and this faction and those people, and why don't they live in there 2 million years, and they need this and they want this and they deserve this. They've lived there. It's just like looking in that kaleidoscope. If you barely move or change your vision, the whole picture changes.
It is very delicate.
I cannot keep up with this picture.
You're right, Arla. It's very delicate.
I'm just as confused now as I was when you began.
Well, I hate to hear that, because that was not the plan.
But see, it's all just sort of changes.
It is heartbreaking, because like in any of these world controversies, it's not the bigwigs who are suffering.
No.
It's the people like us, common working people, who are the ones who are really suffering. Now, I'm leaving a week from Monday, and I'll have a marvelous experience. Traveling in Israel is just like traveling in the United States. You're absolutely safe, probably safer there than here. Security is very tight. The people are wonderful. I'll spend a day and a half in the Palestinian community. I'll spend 2 full days in Jordan with Jordanians, and that'll be wonderful. Very hospitable.
Is Syria part of one of the nations that's like Jordan and
No,
Israel and
no.
Egypt? No.
Syria's a mess.
Nobody goes to Syria.
Syria's a mess, and no tourists are going to Syria anywhere.
No.
My dream is to go to Damascus one day. I would love to go to Damascus.
Left of Damascus.
But we're not going, we ain't going
We ain't
there.
going there.
But I'll travel, I'll have a great time, we'll have wonderful restaurants, wonderful, we'll have a lot of fun. It's a wonderful place, and I want to say to you, if you get the chance to go, you should go. It's really an amazing experience, but when you go, hopefully your eyes will be a little more open to what you're seeing. When you see that beautiful new planned community on the hill, you know what that is. And when you see this big imposing wall, you know what that is. And this is one reason why when we tell our group that when we do our big shopping, jewelry and those kind of things that people like to buy, we do it on the Palestinian side because there's no money there. And we don't stay in hotels on the Palestinian side. We stay in hotels in the Israeli side. But I'll have a great time, and it'll be very safe, and it's educational and informative and entertaining. But it's a difficult place to live. Now, if you're Israeli, living on the Israel side, it's a great place to live. Jobs, recreation. Palestinians have a hard time because there are not jobs on the Palestinian side of the wall. Very, very difficult. And the best jobs are on the Israeli side, and there is no way that they know that they can get through a security checkpoint every day of the week. Maybe Tuesday and Friday they'll get through the security checkpoint. But Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, they'll not get through. Well, what employer is going to hire you if they don't know if you can come to work or not? And so it's a form of control over the Palestinians that they can't hold jobs that pay a regular salary.
I think the pain too is the fact that they are outcast from other countries. And as I mentioned in one of the previous ones, talking to one of the Syrian nationals, that they were essentially outcast from Syria. Well, the same thing with Jordan and Lebanon, that groups that are now, quote, Palestinian, really aren't. They were outcast, pushed out of those countries, so they're not getting any aid from the associated other countries. So unfortunately, when we see things like Iran offering support for it, they're not really offering support. And that's not helping the Palestinians any. The Palestinians could, in fact, build a good, solid nation state within themselves if people would keep meddling with them.
The picture changes way too quickly. It's delicate.
That's
It
it.
just changes and changes and changes.
Israel is the #1 recipient of American foreign aid and has been for I don't know how long, many, many, many years. We give more money to Israel than any other country on earth. The Palestinians have started receiving funds, but you may remember the president just recently said he was withholding Palestinian funds. So the Palestinians say, well, what about them? Well, he's not withholding Israeli funds. And it's all in the news every day. Well, pray. Any final comment? Thank you for indulging this topic over these last 5 weeks. We will be meeting for business meeting next Wednesday night.